Violent protests in Senegal leave 16 dead. Calls for calm by the UN and the African Union fall on deaf ears, with violence escalating over the weekend. With an opposition leader sentenced to prison, rumors of the president running for an illegal third term, and elections in 9 months, could this be just the beginning of the chaos? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Senegal. Senegal is facing one of its deadliest bouts of unrest in decades. 16 people have died, 500 have been arrested after 3 days of clashes. The catalyst for the protests was the sentencing of opposition leader Ousmane Sonko to 2 years in prison. Sonko, who came third in Senegal's 2019 presidential election, is popular with the country's youth. Now he's been convicted of corrupting that youth, but acquitted of rape. His supporters maintain his legal troubles are part of a government effort to derail his candidacy in next February's presidential election. Adding to the political tension is the belief that President Macky Sall plans to stay in office for an unconstitutional third term. He's neither confirmed nor denied this, despite opposition calls to state publicly that he will not run again. In a move to quell protests, Senegal's government's cut access to mobile internet services in certain areas over the weekend. Now, rights groups say they're violating freedom of speech, and it's affecting apps like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and YouTube. The government says hateful and subversive messages have been posted online, and protests are now harming the economy.
The attacks have targeted essential state infrastructure, such as water and electricity production plants, public transport, as well as the businesses and banks. The aim of these attacks is to disrupt the country's economic activity and create a climate of terror among our citizens.
Since Thursday, most shops have closed, and the majority of people in Dakar have remained at home, afraid of the situation outside. With protesters gathering regularly in certain neighborhoods, the government has enlisted the army to back up the many riot police still stationed around the city. The government says they're maintaining stability. Protesters say they are defending democracy.
When the verdict came down, all the Senegalese people were ashamed. Because you can't prosecute someone for rape for 2 years and then fall back on a case of corruption of minors. The Senegalese people are not fools. We know that the state wants to prevent an opponent from standing in the presidential elections. But it's no use. Ousmane Sonko is going to take part in the elections.
Since the beginning of this story, we have lost a great deal. The country's economy has taken a big hit. The trial has lasted 2 years, and every time there is a hearing, all the traders are forced to close their shops for 2 or 3 days. The loss is incalculable at a time when we have expenses to make.
It split our hearts, which is why we demonstrated. Tension was also very high, because the students ransacked almost all the places in the university that are important. The faculty of law was also affected, because they said that it had no reason to exist. Since the judges have been corrupted, even though it is here that we learn all the laws and the rules of justice, if these laws are not applied, the students have decided that this faculty has no reason to exist.
I asked the President of the Republic of Senegal, Macky Sall, to leave Ousmane Sonko alone. I come from Béol in the north of Senegal, and I'm here in Zingincourt to work. It is difficult to work and earn a living. If not, President Macky Sall can find us a bus and go home. My candidate in the presidential elections of 2024 is no one but Ousmane Sonko.
Well, joining me now to debate the state of Senegal are from London, David Otto. He is the director of the Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. Also from London is Paul Melly, an Africa Program Consulting Fellow at Chatham House. And in Dakar is Ousmane Aly Diallo, a researcher at Amnesty International. Thanks all so much for joining us. David, I'll start with you. Why won't Macky Sall simply just say that he will not seek a third term? Wouldn't that have put a lot of this to rest from the very beginning?
And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing in Senegal, because the president does not want to confirm, neither does he want to deny that he will be running for the third term, and this is causing unnecessary stress, for a country that has been experiencing economic issue in the backdrop of COVID-19, the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine. So it's a very challenging situation for Senegal, which has been a beacon of democracy. But not just Senegal. We're talking about an ECOWAS region that has seen military coup d'états at the back of presidents that have decided to run for more than their term. We've seen that when people have gone to the streets to protest. So this is not good news. In addition to the accusation by the opposition that he's trying to stifle the representation of his main opposition leader Ousmane Sonko in the upcoming 2023 elections. 2024 elections. So I think it's not good for a country like Senegal that has seen some stability in democracy.
Paul, let me get your take on that. I mean, it seems to be this accumulation of first Macky Sall not really saying that he will not run illegally, unconstitutionally, I should say, for a third term. Then you have the prosecution of a leading opposition figure, legitimate or not. We'll discuss that in a minute if we can. And then to hear Macky Sall kind of have the nerve to say that he wasn't asked politely enough, if I understood correctly, whether he will run for a third term. It makes one feel that it really didn't have to escalate to this point.
I think that's the feeling of a lot of Senegalese, because when Macky Sall was first running for the presidency back in 2011, 2012, he really ran on two issues. One was the cost of living, economic issues, but the other was restoring the values of the republic, because Abdoulaye Wade, the person who was president at the time, he also bent the constitutional rules, if you like, to try and seek a third mandate. And Macky Sall made a very big point of saying that that was wrong and he would only do 2 terms. So it's not just about the fact that the constitutional rules appear to block a third term, although not every Senegalese constitutional lawyer seems to buy that case, but it's that Macky very specifically made that personal promise. That's what gives it all this such sort of weight and significance. And then on top of that, as David Otto pointed out, there are economic challenges. People had a very tough time during the COVID lockdown. There is a real problem of creating jobs for young people. Despite an overall successful economy, there are a lot of social and economic pressures. But the real crunch thing is that Macky made this promise, and there have been also this series of trials which have seen other potential presidential contenders ruled out. And that's why, although the latest trial, the one concerning Ousmane Sonko, as in any case, or as in many cases concerning allegations of rape or sexual assault, it's one person's word against another. For many, many Senegalese, the justice system has lost credibility and is under political manipulation. So people just don't trust the process.
Let me turn to Ousmane, because I'd like to get your thoughts on what you just heard. And also, if you could tell us what is happening on the ground in Dakar where you are. And if you can, do focus on this complaint by many that the judiciary is not independent in Senegal.
Yes, I think the complaint about the judiciary being under the thumb of the government has been central to the discussion made by the opposition, but also by the anger that has been felt in Dakar during the protests that have started since Thursday. We cannot understand why people are so adamant on fighting against this conviction, which is actually for corrupting youth and not for the initial charges of rape and death threats. If you do not consider how the judiciary has excluded political adversaries of Macky Sall since 2016. I think Dr. Paul Melly talked earlier about the case of Karim Wade, who was convicted for embezzlement and ruled out of the 2019 presidential elections. And the same thing has happened also with Khalifa Sall, the former mayor of Dakar, who was convicted for graft and concussion and excluded from the 2019 political protest, presidential elections. So the fact that many of the opposition, civil society, and youth have taken over the streets since Thursday is that they, in their mind, there is this manipulation of the judiciary, which has lost many of its credibility over the last 2 years because many political actors have been preemptively arrested for calling for insurrection when they have criticized the ruling of Macky Sall. Also, offenses of insulting the head of state have been used to detain opposition leaders. And more importantly, during the March 2021 protests that happened in Senegal, at least 14 people have been killed, and nobody has been tried for these cases of excessive use of force. Just giving a summary of what has happened since Thursday, at Amnesty International, we have accounted for at least 23 people being killed since Thursday between Dakar and Ziguinchor. Most of them when security forces fired live ammunition at them. And we are very fearful that this death toll might increase because many have been severely wounded and there have been denials of medication and medical help by security forces.
Okay. Let me come back to David because as per what Ousmane was saying, when we talk about the prosecution of these other political actors, I mean, are these, I should say, these political actors in some cases are not completely innocent. So is it possible to kind of blur the lines with the judiciary to make it look like justice is actually being served when there is a political angle to it? But then again, I remember seeing Senegalese people celebrate when Karim Wade in particular was actually prosecuted successfully. So how difficult is it to tell if these opposition people are innocents that are being unfairly prosecuted or if there actually is wrong on both sides?
I think the devil is always in the details, and it is not always a matter of guilt or innocence. It is more or less about trust that people have in the judiciary. If you believe that a certain judiciary is impartial, if they believe that the judiciary cannot be trusted, it has no independence. The government, has a say as to how a particular verdict could go. Then, irrespective of whether someone is innocent or guilty, the population will still deem it. I mean, this is all about atmospherics. It's all about, the population's sentiment and view. So right now, the Senegalese who are protesting do not believe that the judiciary, can be independent. They believe that, it could be manipulated, by the executive. And therefore, whatever comes out of it, even when, it is possible that an opposition leader would be guilty, the people will simply not believe it. So it's all about the antiques, and how the government has demonstrated its credibility. Remember, this is not the first time that Ousmane Sonko has either been arrested or charged, with an offense. So a lot of the protesters, see this as just a means for the government to rifle on the position of Ousmane Sonko from running in the upcoming election.
Right. Paul, let me get your take. Go ahead,
Just
Ousmane.
to jump on Dr. Otto's point, I think the trust in the judiciary is central to understand why people have been protesting. Because as you raised the point, some of these opposition leaders that were convicted may have been guilty. But there have been many cases of politicians and actors close to the ruling power who have been charged by, let's say, the Cour des Comptes, which is an audit, a National Bureau of Audit of Senegal, of embezzlement and graft, and they have never been prosecuted for these possible charges. Recently, there have been a report about the management of the COVID-19 fund, which discovered that there have been widespread graft by the government executives on how they handled that fund, but there have been no judicial investigation that has been opened. And so this distrust in the judiciary and the fact that it is seen as partial is central to the willingness to go and take the streets.
Okay. You know, Paul, when it comes to Ousmane Sonko, staying with this, I mean, he was acquitted of the worst charges, which were very bad, but still, I mean, going to a massage parlor in the middle of the night, you know, doesn't really bode well for someone who wants to be president. So some in Senegal think that says enough, that he shouldn't necessarily be fought for, especially the way some of his supporters are taking to the streets, so willing to go to battle for him. Still, what was actually legal for them to prosecute?
Well, that's where there's a lot of mystery around the handling of the case, because as was already mentioned, the two strong charges, the ones that had been talked about for the last 2 years during the investigation and the build up to the trial, were rape and the use of making lethal threats against the woman working in the massage parlor who had made the rape allegation. So those were obviously very grave charges, and the court rejected those. They decided that Sonko was innocent of those, but only really at the very last minute did the prosecution bring up this question of corrupting the morals of the woman concerned, because she was aged 20 at the time rather than 21. And then when the judge gave his final decision and sentence, he didn't even go for the heaviest sentence that the prosecution had demanded, a 5-year sentence. He went for a 2-year prison sentence. And so that sends the message that that the court did not view this as a very serious offence. But the significance of the 2 years is it's just long enough to keep him out of the next presidential election.
Exactly.
And it's really that which has stirred people's, or reinforced people's belief that this is a political trial. Because if he'd been, why did the judge not sentence him to 5 years? It was such a serious offence.
Okay, those questions will remain out there for some time, but I want to move on to something else. Paul, you alluded to, I mean, opposition supporters may be frustrated with what's happened to Ousmane Sonko, and they blame the government, but as you said, their frustration goes beyond that. These are young people, many of whom are struggling with unemployment and poverty, and they're blaming the government for their marginalization. Are we seeing the culmination of what was a sort of ticking time bomb?
Yes, I think, it's very essential to understand that, protests, are a build-up. When people go on the streets for one particular reason, usually that's not the only reason why they're there. Their economic situation, the social situation of the country. Again, as I mentioned, Senegalese are looking for a stable governance. They are looking to have a governance, which can provide people the very basic necessities. And, they see someone like Ousmane Sonko as a, potential, leader that would provide them, such, So at this point in time, what we're seeing is frustration being exhibited by this protest. So not everyone is in support of the conviction or the failure to convict him of some of these charges. Most people are concerned about what is in for them, as citizens of Senegal.
Okay, Paul, sorry, go ahead.
Well, but I think it's not absolutely certain that if for example, had Macky Sall said, I'm not going to do a 3rd term, and there was no question of political manipulation of the judiciary, if people really trusted the case that was being brought against Sonko, I'm not sure if there would have been quite the same level of anger. But the other thing is, I don't think it's driven purely by, I'm not sure how much the social factors are really bringing this to the boiling point. Of course, you can look across West Africa and you can see country after country where you have a huge youth population, governments are struggling to find ways of creating jobs, particularly for young people in the cities. But I think it's this coincidence of 3 or 4 different things at one time. People could have accepted the steady progress, and the government has made some progress on the economic front in terms of youth employment and so on. it has actually been relatively effective compared to some other countries in terms of development policy. People could have lived with that if they'd felt that the political process was credible and the president was honoring his promises. And Sonko, I suppose the other thing is that Sonko is a bit different from the traditional political class.
Okay.
He's not a standard party politician, although he now leads a party. He's a former civil servant who left the government service because he was making allegations about corruption.
Okay.
And he has this sort of outsider appeal that traditional politicians don't.
Ousmane, I want to get your opinion on that as well, whether or not it's the social marginalization playing a major role in the frustration we're seeing now among these protesters. Because there's also been some talk that, the oil revenue that is supposed to come in because of the recent oil discoveries, that people are frustrated thinking that it won't be fairly distributed among the population, that the government corruption will set in and that money will be squandered.
Yes, I think that is the right point. There have been several elements at play regarding the protest. There is this element of social marginalization, especially with the youth, that is in the informal sector, and that has been a kind of neglected by the different governments. Also, although there has been economic growth in Senegal over the last years, this economic growth has not been shared or felt by the people of Senegal, especially given the rise of youth unemployment over the last few years. We have several people that have graduated from universities that have a master's degree, but that cannot have a work that fits with their qualification. So many of them have to be underemployed, especially in the informal sector, and try to live by expecting something new to support them. And this element is essential to understand the appeal of Ousmane Sonko, because he's one of the few politicians that has tapped into those anxieties in Senegal and this anger about the growing drift between the ruling class and the middle class in Senegal, in which many people do not feel themselves to be included in the growth. So they see there is this expression: we haven't seen this growth and we haven't eaten part of this growth. And just to jump on the last element about the oil revenues, there have been reports and also concerns about the management of the oil contracts that have, and especially the gas contracts next to the border with Mauritania, which has been discovered in 2015 and 2016, and how many of the governments executives, President Sall's brother, for example, Mr. Aliou Sall, has been a key intermediary in selling part of the rights of an initial contract to BP Oil for the exploration and exploitation of gas along the border with Mauritania. And in this context, also, I think one element that has frustrated many Senegalese people is the one that you initially talked about President Sall asking citizens to ask him nicely if he's going to represent himself in February 2024. It is hard to know for people that are not based in Senegal, but there is a lot of pride about the democratic situation in Senegal, about the historical path, and to see that those things that have been thought of and won by the Senegalese people over the decades are being jeopardized by the ambitions of one man who was fighting against the third term of President Abdoulaye Wade in 2011 and 2012 is very frustrating, especially when he said that he is only eligible for 2 terms just as lately as 2019.
Okay. Ousmane, that will have to be the final word. We are completely out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. There's so much more to talk about, and I'm sure we'll be speaking to all of you again in the near future on this very topic, as so much more remains to be resolved. So I'd like to thank all 3 of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.